Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Lifestyle Lifters show. As we approach the October bank holiday weekend, I said it'd be a good idea to actually share my experience running the Dublin Marathon back in 2018 because the Dublin Marathon, again, it's on this year, this October bank holiday weekend. So back in 2018, I ran the Dublin Marathon with a friend of mine, Garrod Smith, and I'm definitely not built to be a marathon runner. I At the time I was 86 kilos. Um, pretty stocky, not your typical marathon physique, as they would say. But the reason I signed up, I'll go right into it. It was back in March, I remember, March 2018, and I listened to a podcast on Joe Rogan. And I'm sure we're all familiar with this person at this stage. His name is David Goggins. Now, I'd never heard of him until he appeared in Joe Rogan. I feel that really like just built his name and built his brand. And it just got me absolutely pumped afterwards. So for anyone who hasn't listened to that, go back to David Goggins, his first appearance on Joe Rogan. He had two shows on, but this was the very first one. So David Goggins, on that episode, he basically described his San Diego one day experience. He wanted to qualify for some grueling endurance events that was like, I don't know, over 100 miles. And in order to do that, in order to qualify, he had to do this thing called the San Diego One Day. And basically, the San Diego One Day is you had to run 100 miles inside one day in 24 hours around a 1 mile track. And Goggins on that podcast, just something resonated with me. He said after he got to mile 70, he was done. Physically, mentally, everything, he was broke. He started peeing blood like to that extreme. But then when his girlfriend at the time said to him, David, you're not going to make the time. The 24 hours is approaching. You still have 30 more miles to go. If we keep going at this pace, you're not going to make it. And then he goes on to say, and it just honestly, it was one of the most like motivating stories I've ever heard, that he started out and from the mile 70 to mile 100, started out walking again, just walking the mile. And then he said just something just clicked where his mind, his body, his soul, his spirit connected. And he ran those last 30 or 20 odd miles plus an extra one. So he actually did 101. And he finished and he qualified. And he went on to say that that really just showed him and proved to him that when he thought he was 100% done at mile 70, he was really only operating at 40%. And he called that his 40% rule. So that got me thinking, as I was listening to this podcast, what am I truly capable of? What potential do I have that I'm currently not fulfilling? So at the time, obviously just being obsessed with all things fitness, training, I asked myself, what is the most difficult thing you could possibly imagine yourself doing? Now, before listening to Goggins, and to be honest, even afterwards for quite a long period of time, I wasn't even aware of these ultra endurance events. So for me, the most difficult thing that I could have possibly thought that I might be able to do would be to run the Dublin Marathon, or would be to run a marathon. So I said to myself, right, I'm going to run a marathon this year. Let's sign up for one. So obviously Dublin being the biggest marathon in Ireland, over 20,000 people apply for it. I said, right, I want to do that. So 2 or 3 days later, after listening to Goggins, I went onto the Dublin Marathon website and I signed myself up. And that's really, really important if you're setting any goals at all. Just freaking dive in and go for it before you even know that you're ready. And the real beauty of me doing that, of signing myself up, was I now had a goal and I had a deadline in mind. Whatever it was, that October bank holiday weekend in 2018, that was the deadline. So now that I signed myself up, I knew I was doing it. And there was no talking me out of it now. I was doing it because I committed to it. And consistency, it's the number one of the most important driving factors of human behavior is consistency. That we're consistent with our own words. That when we say we're going to do something, we do it. So when I said that I was going to do the marathon, the very first thing I did was I probably wouldn't advise this to anyone. The following day, driving to work, driving to school. So I worked as a primary school teacher in Mary National School, fantastic school with lovely, lovely staff there. And living at home, I commuted to and from school every single day. So I just said, okay, a marathon. How long actually is a marathon? 42 kilometers, but like, what's that look like? So I clocked my commute to work, and ironically, 42K exactly. So I was like, oh my God. I have to run the equivalent of the distance that I commute to work. And that is a marathon. So it was a bit disheartening at first. I was like, God, I'm not sure if I'll be able to do this. But how do you do anything? You just put one foot in front of the other. All right. You attack it in small, small chunks. You break it down into the micro, and the macro will take care of itself. So my training then for the Dublin Marathon from around March up until roughly May or June that year. Bear in mind, I was playing football with Killearn 3 times a week. You'd be training Tuesday, Friday, and either Sunday morning or a game at the weekend. I would not advise this again. So I learned a lot too from what to do and what not to do. And to be honest, it is quite difficult to balance marathon training with GA training. And if I'm being honest, it's probably not advisable because they're two complete different energy systems. GA, you need explosive speed, excuse me. You need explosive speed, you need power, you need strength, whereas marathon is more so, obviously long duration and endurance. So I would have just started out every Wednesday. I remember that was like my training Tuesday, training Friday, match the weekend. It would have been hard for me to get a run in on the Monday because you'd be playing a match on the Sunday, and then I didn't want to do a run a Thursday or a Saturday with a game the next day. So I would have just dedicated Wednesday to like our quote unquote marathon training day. And that literally just started out doing like 8 kilometer runs and built that up to maybe 18 kilometers from March until May. Now, I remember my very first 8K run. I was just wearing like a regular pair of Adidas shoes. I shin splints afterwards. Very, very sore, very, very painful. And again, you always question, like, Jesus, what have I actually signed myself up to? Can I even do this? But I also think that's a good thing in a way. If there's that element of doubt and there's not that, you don't have that absolute certainty, it just gets you outside your comfort zone. So it definitely got me outside my comfort zone. Started out doing 8K runs, built that up to 12K around the town of Tuam. And then what I did was, for the following couple of weeks, anyone who's familiar with my hometown, Killearn or Barnajarg, there is a nice kind of 1 mile or 1 kilometer track there from the shop all the way up to the church. And we call it Church Hill because it's like a 300-meter, just steady, steady incline. And I mean, this is a steep, steep hill. So I remember I finished out my training come June or May before we had like the football championship, doing 9 runs up and 9 runs down Church Hill. But the reason I did Church Hill was, so I got more into the books, I got more into reading and researching. If you can make your training harder than the event itself, the event is going to seem that bit easier. So for me, because I could only dedicate at this time one dedicated run per week, I said I'm going to try and make that really, really challenging and not just do it on the flat, do it on a high incline, so that when I'm actually running on the flat, it's much, much easier. Okay, so I kind of built this up from March to April to May in 2018, with the marathon being in October. Then I got injured. So I got an injury playing football just at the start of June. And it was something, I think, to my adductor and my hip flexor. And this essentially put me out of running for the remainder of June, July, and up until mid-August. back when we were back in the championship again. So at that stage, then, the running was building up okay. Like I almost built up to a half marathon, 18 kilometers, but it was on a high incline. And you're what, 5 months out from the event. Was still in a pretty decent place. But this then obviously set me back. So then it begged the question. So Garrod Smith, my friend who I ran the marathon with, started of September. Bear in mind now the marathon is about 8 weeks away. We haven't had a conversation after football training one night. Will we or won't we do this? But as I said, consistency, it's one of the number one most driving factors of human behavior. And we said, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. Start of September, having not ran in properly in about 3 months. Again, probably not advisable, but what we did was we said, we got to dive in now, we got to go hard. We did a half marathon. And my goal with that half marathon was just to finish it without stopping. And it was one of the most challenging runs that I did. Like just going from zero back up to the half again. I remember it was around Salt Hill on a nice sunny Saturday, just at the start of September. But we got it done. We got the half marathon done. And that gave us a bit of hope. But again, it's very, very difficult, as I said, to balance running a marathon and while playing GAA. So September was a busy month. We had championship, 2 or 3 weekends there. So we couldn't really do our long run at the weekend because we were preparing ourselves for the match. So that meant then that there was a gap of about 3 or 4 weeks where we hadn't done any consecutive running. And now we were at the end of September. So we're about 4 weeks out. With the football season slowly finishing up, that's when that's when I really started picking up my training. So what my training would have looked like, essentially you're looking at 4 or 5 solid weeks of preparation was as follows. I still would have had GAA 2 to 3 times a week, but the championship now is finished up. So every weekday I did about a 12K run, and the weekend I did a longer run. All right. So having done one half marathon, I decided again at the end of September, let's run another half marathon. But that was really rewarding because I remember I knocked, 10, 12 minutes off my time. So we did a half marathon the last weekend in September, and then we're into October. Now we're into marathon month. Okay. So I remember my second or my third ever long run, it was a 30K. Then I did a 35K. And then it was like 2 weeks out from the marathon and the marathon itself. So this is not how to prepare for a marathon, just for everyone knows. This is how I prepared. There is a difference there. So I essentially only did, what was that? 5 long runs, 2 half, 30K, at 35K. 4 long runs, sorry. So 4 long runs in the lead up to the marathon itself. Now, that being said, I really dialed in my gym work and my training for those 4 weeks. So my gym work, I'm not sure if I'd be able to do it now. It was hard. It was really hard, and I knew I had to push myself hard. So I did a lot of condition work, hard condition work. I'm talking things like a 1 mile run as fast as you can. Then you do some strength work, back and do another 1 mile run as fast as you can. Other like hard, quote unquote, CrossFit finishers, which I probably wouldn't be doing now, but things like, maybe a barbell thruster, med ball slams, kettlebell swings, and you do like 3-3-3 of each, then 6-6-6, 9-9-9, all the way up to like 18 or 21. And you're doing that for time. And the reason I was doing all of that hard condition was I wanted to improve my overall anaerobic fitness. So when you're running a marathon, it's primarily aerobic, which means you're running with oxygen. You'll be able to have a conversation with someone in general while you're running. But anaerobic is when your heart rate is really elevated and you're not really in a position to have a conversation because you're training, your heart is beating so fast. And the reason I did a lot of anaerobic conditioning was because if I could really get comfortable with my heart rate being up to upwards of 180 beats per minute. I remember when I was doing the 1 mile run for time, because I had a heart rate monitor on, they say your max heart rate is 220 minus your age. So me at the time being, I think I was 24, would I have been? 24, 23, 24, 220 minus, would say 23. Technically, my max heart rate would be at 197. Or we'll just say 200 to make it easy. So if my heart rate monitor was showing 180, 185 beats per minute, I was training upwards of 90% of my max heart rate. Even though when you run a marathon, your average heart rate will be about 140, which would be roughly 70%. Okay. But the reason I did such hard condition work in the lead up to the marathon was because if I'm comfortable at my heart rate being at 190, how much easier is it going to feel when it goes back down to 150 running the marathon? Just like imagine the NFL Combine. You used to have a 225, 100 kilo bench press competition where you had to bench press 225 for as many reps as possible. But who do you think is going to perform better at the 225 test? Someone who's able to bench 150 and then they back down to 100, or someone whose one rep max is 110? Because the person who can bench 150, that obviously feels really heavy. But when they put 100 back in the bar, it just seems much, much lighter. So my reason for doing such a lot of like hard condition training was that if I could just get comfortable operating at a high heart rate, that then operating at the moderate to lower intensity heart rate, or the 140, 150 would say heart rate, well, I'd just be much, much more comfortable. So that is how I actually would have trained for those 4 weeks or so, from the end of September up until the marathon. I would have done 2 runs, so around a 12K during the week, and then your long run on the Saturday, the weekend. Nutrition wise, carb load the day before the long run. So I wouldn't have been shy on carbs. Get your oats, your sweet potatoes, all of those good foods into you. Morning off the run, would have done a bit of mobility work, a bit of stretching, had a coffee, and I preferred to have my breakfast primarily blended just because I felt I absorbed it better. So my go-to kind of pre-run meal would have been something like 100 grams of oats, a banana, and a scoop of protein blended up. I'd have that with maybe some scrambled eggs. I would then bring some gels with me just to have those as you go along in the runs. Gym work then. Okay, so again, 2 runs during the week, 12K and long run the weekend. Gym work, I did a lot of hard conditioning, as I said, but my split was as follows. I would have done kind of lower body, I remember, on a Monday and some hard condition work on top of that. On the Tuesday, I would have done a bit more of like upper body, and again, a small bit of conditioning as well. I had like more of a recovery session on the Thursday. You would have had your run on the Saturday, and then always the day after the run. I like to have something to look forward to. So you'd be obviously stiff, you'd be sore after your run on the Saturday. I would have always done a Sunday morning upper body pump session. So I was probably training, to be honest, 6 to 7 days a week there. All right. I always say though, it's quite difficult to overtrain, but very easy to under recover. So I made sure that I was eating the right amount of food, especially carbohydrates, especially protein for recovery, that I was staying hydrated so that I could perform to my absolute best. Okay. So this then brought me up to the marathon. I remember the hardest run that I've done probably wasn't the marathon itself. It was that 35K run I did 2 weeks before the marathon. Because all of the runs that I'd done up until that point, the weather was nice. It was lovely and mild outside. Absolutely no rain. And it was something Garage and I were speaking about afterwards. I remember saying to him, like, there's barely been any day at all where we actually got wet while we were running. Whatever, if that was luck on our side, but this day was completely different. It was just a horrible, damp, wet October day. Rain was falling from the skies. And as you can imagine, I wasn't too motivated to get that running. But sometimes you just got to go for it. So I remember Parked my car down at the village, and I had like a route mapped out. And you just step out, you look at the watch, you press start, and off you go. And I just told myself, I remember I told myself, let's just get over this first kilometer because it was starting with Churchill. And if I get over that first kilometer, that's going to be the hardest part of this entire run. Now, whether that was true or not, it didn't matter. But just what did that build for me? It built a win. So after that first kilometer, I was like, right, hardest part's already done. Let's do it. And the great thing is too, when you are running in the rain, or when you're doing anything in, hard weather conditions, the places where you'd usually see people, walking around and it'd be busy, absolute quiet, like nobody around at all. And you can gain you can just gain a lot of like mental kind of certainty from that nobody else is doing this. And obviously there were, but that's just what I needed to tell myself to get me through that 35K run. I said, who else is doing this? No one else is doing this, or no one else would even want to do this. And again, that obviously wasn't true, but it was just something that I need to tell myself to condition my brain to prepare me for that 35K run. So that was without doubt the hardest run that I've ever done. I remember the last 5K, I could barely, I was running, but just about. But again, my goal was to do it without stopping, and I didn't stop. And that just gave me great confidence. 2 weeks out from the marathon, I just said to myself, look, if I can do 35K, there's another seven in me. So then the 2 weeks, that was my longest run then, 35K, 2 weeks before the marathon. And then the following week, we just had to taper it back. We did like a steady state 10K and just like a small bit of interval run, I feel. Then came the actual week of the marathon. So we drove up to Dublin the day before. And one of the first things that we did was uh, we went into Tesco. We went into Tesco in Dublin and we got our post-marathon meal, our post-marathon treat. And for anyone who knows what my weakness is, it is cereal. Cereal was always like my go-to like post-marathon run, or even the post-long run treats that I would have had, like some form of cereal. So I'm not sure. I'm sure everyone knows them. We would have had them when we were young. You know those mini packs of cereal? They come in like boxes of eight. And instead of having like just Cocoa Pops or Frosties, you get to taste them all, but it's just those small mini boxes. So I remember I got a pack of those eight, a pack of eight of those, and I think Garage got something similar. No, Garage got Crunchy Nut actually, and that was like our post marathon treat. So the day before then was all just about the carb load. I remember I made like what would you call them? Banana blueberry oat bread. Shout out to Daniel Davy Nutrition. He's a great recipe in his cookbook, Eat Up and Raise Your Game. I made those, so I had a good few of those the day before. Just really carb loading and getting as much food into me as possible. Morning off the marathon, then whatever breakfast that I would have had for the long runs, I would have had the same one there for the marathon. So it was my 100 grams of oats, my protein, and my banana blended, and then just a cup of coffee. So then the morning of the marathon, it's all just about preparing yourself, preparing the mindset, trying to stay as still as possible. Um, Getting to the bathroom was actually a big thing that I learned. So if anyone is running the marathon or considering doing one, get there early. All right. If you need to use the bathroom beforehand, obviously, all of these things do take time. So just get there early. And for all of the runs that I did, I ran without earphones. Now, I don't believe this to be true now, but actually, just going back to Goggins, I don't agree with him, but this is what he said at the time, and I just kind of took his word that having or listening to music is quote unquote cheating. Now, so for all my runs for the marathon, I would have just gone complete silent. And you know what? It's like every single problem that you have that you encounter in your life, when you finish up running, it's like they don't even matter that much. They don't even matter that much. And I think that's the great thing about exercise. We can all build up a lot of these perceived challenges or perceived things that we're worried about that haven't even happened yet. But then after we actually exercise and train, we come to realize that a lot of the stuff that we worry about, most of them don't even come true. And the majority of it doesn't really matter. It's not as important as we think. And I found that was the great thing about running. So then the Dublin Marathon itself, you're categorized into your estimated finish time. So my goal was to finish it inside 4 hours. I said I want to finish it inside 4 hours. So there's like people running with for a 4 hour, like we'll say a 4 hour pacer. There's people who's like a 3 hour 50 pacer, a 3 hour 40, 3 hour 30, all the way to 3 hours and post that as well. So you just kind of try stay with your group and with your pacer. So for me, my goal was to finish it inside 4 hours. And for the marathon itself, I kind of had three kind of mini targets in place. The first mini target that I had, one of my cousins living in Dublin, she was around the halfway mark. So the first thing that I said to myself, let's just get to halfway. Let's just see your cousin. All right, she's going to be the first marker there. And that's what I did. So just kind of built that up in the mind. But I must say, just the atmosphere there in Dublin, it was absolutely incredible. We were lucky with the weather. It was lovely. It was nice and mild. And just the people filling the street, giving you out Lucozade Sport, fruit, sweets, everything there. Just really, really helpful. 2FM also had a few different stalls set up, and it does help. It definitely would give you that extra 5 or 10%. So that was my first target, seeing my cousin at 21K. The next target then was to see my aunt and my uncle, and they were at round about 30 to 35K, around UCD. So again, that was the next target of mine. Just keep going, put one foot in front of the other. And what I will say is, people always talk about the 20 mile, that when you get to the 20 miles into a marathon, that's when difficulties tend to happen. And that's when people tend to slow down. But I just didn't believe that to be true. Like, is that true, or is that just what people are saying? Does anyone actually question that? So I remember the 20 mile mark, you'd be looking roughly at how many kilometers would that be? That would be 32 kilometers or so. That's when people call it the 20 mile wall. But I just kept going. I just felt good. And I think a lot of that was just in people's mind at that stage. I just saw people and they're like at mile 20. And all of a sudden they seem to be going at a pretty decent pace. And then they just slow down and start walking. Whereas I just felt, you know what, like a lot of this is just kind of built up in your head. So I still felt good at kilometer 30 and even kilometer 35. So got to see my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin there at UCD around about 30, 35K in. And then my final target was obviously see my family, my mum and dad, and my sister at the finish line. So that was my next goal. And I will say, even at 35K, so previously I would have ran the 35K. So that was the longest that I'd done. But those last 7 kilometers, they weren't that bad. They were tough. But I only really started to feel it round about the last 3 miles. That last 5K or so, that's when I found it really tough. And my average kilometer time, it went from maybe, I don't know, 5:40. I remember those last couple of kilometers, they were up at like nearly 7, maybe potentially 8 minutes a kilometer. And they were, that was a grind. That was an absolute grind. And I remember just like looking and approaching the finish line. It was like 800 meters. And like, oh, I just want to finish this now. I'm ready to freaking collapse. But it was just so rewarding. So crossing the finish line, it's just, it's a sense of accomplishment that you cannot really describe until you experience it. Because I did something that I didn't think was possible at all for me. And whether that was my limiting belief or not, obviously that's another day's story. But when you do something where you have uncertainty about the outcome, but you push through it, It just opens up a whole new world of possibilities for you. And then going back to Goggins, what are we truly capable of? Do we actually know what our potential is? And I just said, I don't want to look back in my life wishing what I could have been. And just running that marathon that day, it really showed me if what was possible if I put my mind to it. So post marathon, what time did I finish in? So I finished at 3:57, 3 hours, 57 minutes. So I reached my goal of sub four, which I was really delighted with. I remember after the marathon, I just lie down on the street. There's like a place where you can go to collect your bags and whatnot. And I just lie down, put my feet up on like the cages, and I just relax there. And in full of pain, of course, but there was just like a great sense of peace almost with it. I just wanted to lay there on the floor, I remember, for until one of the stewards actually had to move me. I just didn't want to move. But it was absolutely like just such a rewarding experience. You go, then you get your bag, saw my family, and we had a nice dinner afterwards in Dublin. And and that was it then. That was the Dublin Marathon. It's just all about the process really. And doing something, as I said, that you didn't think you're truly capable of. At the other end of that, it's just something absolute greatness. It really is. So that was the Dublin Marathon. I remember obviously we got food with my family afterwards. That was lovely. They went back home, back to the house with Garage, and we had our cereal, and I had all 8 boxes for anyone wondering. I had all 8 of them, and I absolutely devoured them. And that was it. And that was it. But one thing that I would recommend, one thing that I was challenged with after the marathon, like I built myself up for the marathon. And I thought like that this was the all or nothing event. But life does go on. And I didn't have any goals set for myself after the marathon. And it took me a while, maybe a week or so, to come down off that high because I had nothing set in stone for afterwards. And the reason I'm sharing this is because if you have a goal or event or something in mind, even if it's a wedding, your wedding, a friend wedding, a holiday or something, always have something prepared for what's next. And this is what they say for bodybuilders or for elite athletes, that if you attach all your identity to this one thing, and then that one thing it's finished up, life does go on and you got to ask yourself, what next? So I found it hard to come down off the high of the marathon. So if I were to go back, one thing that I would recommend is for anyone doing any kind of event like this at all or setting any kind of goals, always think of what goal is next. What's coming after that? Just so you have something to keep the mind and the body in the right place. And that was it. That was my experience running the Dublin Marathon back in 2018. So what is next for me? I don't know. I don't know in terms of physical goals now. I mean, I'd like to set some strength goals for myself, and I have a few in mind. But I'm also touching and maybe flirting with the idea of getting back into that, not even the long endurance world, but something like another marathon potentially. Because I got an operation in my ankle. I got injured again in football 2019, got an operation in my ankle 2020, and I was out for running for a year. So this year, 2022, it's really only the last couple of months, it's been my first time actually getting back into it. So even yesterday I got out for, I think it was just short of an 8 mile run there, and it felt good, about an hour run or so, and it did feel good. So I'm kind of flirting with the idea now of signing up for some event just to get back into it, but that's for another day. But that is how I trained, how I prepared for the Dublin Marathon. And again, I will say this is how I did it. I'm not saying this is how to do it. There is a big, big difference. I did make a lot of mistakes. I didn't give myself enough time, but I was in pretty good shape strength-wise at least, that I could probably just get away with that. But if I were to do it again, I would definitely give myself more time and balance out my training that bit better. But that is all for this podcast. So I hope you got value from it. And just ask yourself, what's one goal that you have in mind? If there's one takeaway, what's one goal that you have in mind that you're not 100% sure that you can or can't do, but it's something that you've been thinking of doing the last while? And just take some time to reflect on that. And remember, what doesn't challenge you doesn't change you. So set goals for yourself. We're coming into the winter now. It's a great time as the evenings are shorter to really level up your health and your fitness. So this could be a goal in the gym, it could be a physique goal, it could be something for next year, 2023, whatever it is. Just have a think. What's one goal that you'd like to set for yourself that you're not 100% sure that you can do it as of now, but it's something that you want to do. And that is your takeaway. So thank you so much for everyone for listening, for leaving the kind reviews, for leaving the ratings. If you haven't done so already, you can do it as you listen to me. If you go on to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review and a rating. Please, that would be awesome, because podcasts generally grow through word of mouth. I don't run ads toward this. So everything that how I'm going to grow this platform is from people like you spreading the good word, leaving reviews, tagging me on your IG stories, and giving me feedback. So if you haven't done that already, I would ask you if you can just take literally 30 seconds to leave a 5-star review and a rating. That'd be awesome. And that is all for this week's show. So thank you all very much for listening. I hope you guys have an awesome week.